Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Linus Karamat, one of the Kenya Elite Program GMAT trainers. In this video, we're going to look at critical reasoning. Critical reasoning is a section in the Bob reasoning part of the GMAT exam. More specifically, we are going to evaluate the argument question types. It is one of the 9 question types that are tested in the critical reasoning section. So let's begin. Evaluate the argument question types basically are types of questions that ask you to consider a question that is given, statistics or a piece of information that will best determine the logical viability of the argument presented in the stimulus. So I can remember from the basics of critical reasoning, you'll be given a stimulus in which you'll have the premise and the conclusion that the author presents, as well as there is a question stem. Now the question step will give you the question type that is being tested, information about the question type, right? And then you have the answer choices, right? So for evaluate the argument question types, they will ask you to consider that question or ask you to come up with a question that best logically describes the scenario that is presented in the stimulus. So this would require you to examine an argument and ask one question that, depending on the answer to that question, would reveal whether the argument is strong or weak, all right? So basically, evaluate the argument. Question types are a blend of strengthened question types and weakened question types. But in this scenario, you're given a number of choices that will best help you evaluate the strength of the stimulus or the argument presented in the stimulus, right? So basically, it's what a question or test that could be answered to evaluate or assess an argument. Then typical phrasings for this question type are like, the answer to each of the following questions will most likely yield information that could be used to assess the author's claim. Which of the following experiments would be most useful in evaluating the argument above? Or could have which of the following tests could be performed to determine the truth of the argument's conclusion? Typical indicator words that you could find that would indicate that the question stem is about and evaluate the argument question type are like evaluate, assess, right? So answers to eliminate in this scenario are answers that are out of scope or more or less doesn't give us gravitas or does not provide conclusive information about the argument that is presented in the stimulus. So we'll look at a practical example of that. We'll do 2 examples that will have different answer choices that we'll see how different question answer choices are, whether to determine their correctness as well as whether it's false given that particular scenario. The strategy to employ in this question type: first, analyze the stimulus and question stem. So again, remember this critical reasoning, you're given a stimulus, get usually a small passage that has the premise and the conclusion. Could be either way, could start out with the premise and end with the conclusion, or start out with the conclusion and end with the premise, all right? Now, between these two premise and conclusion, there are always underlying assumptions that more or less strengthens or give validity to the conclusion that the conclusion that is presented by the author. So it's up to you to go through the question stem and sort of understand what each part play and what are the necessary information that more or less strengthens this or weakens the argument presented, right? Secondly, you pre-think. Pre-thinking the answer would really help you after you've analyzed the argument that is presented. In your own mind, sort of come up with analysis of what potentially could be the solution or could be the answer to the question if the question or the argument that is presented, right? So look for underlying assumptions that the author uses to strengthen his or her argument, strengthen or weaken the argument, right? So those assumptions are more or less what will determine what the answer will most probably be. So if you're able to identify that before you actually grade through the answer choices, then it could really save you time and more or less help you narrow down to the correct answer as soon as possible. So you are free to pause the video where we will attempt the question that is here, after which play and we'll try the question together. So example 1 says, 3 years ago, a sports association announced its concern that an increase in the popularity of computer games will lead to a drop in the amount of time the children spent playing tennis. Clearly, this prediction was inaccurate, since a survey about kids' activities at school shows that many children who are spending more time playing computer games than before have not cut down on their tennis. All right. So this is an argument that is presented by the author of this passage. We were easily able to tell that the introductory sentence or statement is the premise till here. Then watch out for this indicator word clearly indicating the start of a conclusion. So the premise that the author presents this argument is that 3 years ago, a sports association announced its concern that an increase in the popularity of computer games will lead to a drop in the amount of time the children spend playing tennis. All right. So, and the conclusion that is given here is that clearly this prediction was inaccurate, since a survey was done about kids' activities at schools shows that many children who are spending more time playing computer games than before have not cut down on their tennis. So this is basically contrary to the information that is provided in the premise. So the question stem asks, which of the following would it most be useful to establish in order to evaluate the argument? Which of the following would it most useful to establish in order to evaluate the argument? So already, one of the assumptions that you can tell in this argument presented here is that in the premise, the author indicates that the sports association announced its concern that an increase in the popularity of computer games will lead to a drop in the amount of time the children spend playing tennis. This part of the sentence here. Now, in our conclusion, clearly this prediction was inaccurate, since a survey about kids' activities at school. Remember, in our premise, no reference is given to where exactly the children are spending their time. They could be at home or in school. So our conclusion focuses on school, which is valid, but it raises a question: what about when they are out of school? So basically, that is one of the assumptions that is being overlooked here, and would probably be one of our answers. So reading through the answer choices, A says, where there is evidence of other sports or physical activities not being affected by the increased popularity of computer games. So it says, again, whether there is evidence of other sports or physical activities not being affected by increased popularity of computer games. So our argument more or less focuses on tennis, and that is clearly what you should be focusing on. Indicating about other sports or physical activities, I believe in this case is out of scope, and as we had said earlier, answers that are out of scope are definitely wrong for evaluate the argument question types. So eliminate A. B says, whether the children that participated in the survey would testify to the same behavior after school hours. Yes, this question, this answer choice that is provided here, more or less raises the question we had asked ourselves regarding what about after school hours. So most probably this will be the answer to this question. Let's look at the other answer choices before we can make a conclusive decision. C says, whether sports associations are interested in the well-being of children or simply seeing them for the value as budding consumers. So this is a bit out of scope. We are more or less interested in terms of whether children actually playing computer games actually affects their participation in tennis. All right. So this is also out of scope. D says, whether there is any support for the suggestion of a direct relation between computer games and violence in children. So violence in children is out of scope in this scenario. We're just looking at participation of children, or the amount of time children spent playing tennis. All right. He says, whether similar surveys are conducted on adults as well. We are focusing on children, so this is a bit out of scope and doesn't really answer the question that we really want to know. So for this case, the correct answer is B, which is whether the children that participated in survey would testify to the same behavior after school hours.
You're watching Success with Bob Mwiti Show, presented to you by Upstack America. Upstack America is a consulting company that helps immigrants find amazing higher education and job opportunities in the tech industry in the United States. You can find our programs by going to www.upstackamerica.com. Upstack America, we wake you up to the unlimited potential.
Let's look at a second example. The climatic conditions needed for growing tea exist in only a few countries. India is one of the few major producers of tea and exports tea to many tea drinking countries. This year, the production of tea in India has been significantly lower than that in the last 10 years, with just enough to satisfy domestic demand for tea. India will not be able to export any sizable amount of tea. As a result, the tea prices on the international market are expected to increase. All right. Can go through the passage again. The climatic conditions needed for growing tea exist only in a few countries. All right. India is one of the few major producers of tea and exports tea to many tea drinking countries. All right. This year, the production of tea in India has been significantly lower than that in the last 10 years, with just enough to satisfy domestic demand for tea. India will not be able to export any sizable amount of tea. As a result, the tea prices on the international market are expected to increase. So basically, this is our conclusion here, given all this information that serves as a premise in this passage. So which of the following would most be useful to determine which of the following would it be most useful to determine to evaluate the argument? So from this passage that you provided here, or this argument, we are being told that this due to climatic conditions, India, which is only one of a few countries in the world that exports and produce and exports tea, their production this year has been lower than in the last 10 years. So for that reason, they have decided to satisfy local demand first and not export that much amount of tea to other countries as they did before. All right. So as a result of this action or these things that have happened to India, the tea prices in the international market are expected to increase. All right. So sort of go through like this argument in our heads, we can see that from the basic kind of understanding of supply and demand, an increase in supply always leads to a decrease in prices of commodities in the market. So for this case, we are seeing that, and also an increase in demand of a particular commodity with a low supply of it would lead to an increase in prices. All right. So for this case, this commodity tea is in this particular year lower than the previous years. So India, one of the few large tea exporters, producers and exporters, decided not to supply as much tea to the international market. All right. So for that reason, we are being told that tea prices in the global market or international market are expected to increase because obviously there's low supply. So we have to determine whether there's equal increase or a decrease in the demand of this commodity in the market. So A says whether the international demand for coffee, a close substitute of tea, has increased. This is a bit out of scope. You're focusing on tea, and yes, it could affect the price of tea if it's a substitute of yes, it's a close substitute of tea. Yes, that could be a valid argument also, but for our case, let's more or less focus on what is happening to the tea sector. All right, so eliminate that for being a bit out of scope. B, whether the domestic demand for tea in many tea importing countries will increase significantly. Yes, this is a valid argument. So if there is an increase in demand of tea in those countries that India exports to, then definitely there will be an increase in the prices, all right, international market prices, all right. But if there's low demand of tea in the international market, then definitely the prices will be a bit lower. So this is quite an answer choice that could really help us evaluate this argument. C says whether the production of tea in India was disturbed because of changes in climatic conditions in the country. This is a bit out of scope. We're looking at an answer choice that more or less explains whether there will be an increase in the price in the international market, right? D says where the tea prices on the world market have often fluctuated in the past. This is a bit out of scope, could be relevant to some extent, but not really to answer the question that we have presented here, right? E says, where the other producers of tea in the world producing sizable quantity of tea. So yes, already there are only a few countries producing tea, India being among them. So already we know this is a small pack or small group of countries producing tea. So for that reason, we are also not being told about how others produce tea in their respective countries. These are the few countries, right? So for that reason, this doesn't really explain whether the issue of pricing in the international market. So eliminate that. So our best answer for this case is B, which says where the domestic demand for tea in many tea importing countries will decrease significantly. So for that reason, with that, we've come to the end of this video. Kindly join us in our GMAT training sessions. We elaborate this and other strategies that you could employ in your verbal and quantitative reasoning of the GMAT exam. Thank you.